CARCAST podcast. It's a podcast where we talk cars. I'm here with Jake. Jake's always with us for every episode. And we have David here with us. We're all from Rhode Island College. We're going to talk a little bit about cars, and we're going to get started. Today's topic is about mechanics. What has a mechanic done to your car that you may have disagreed on, or have they messed up on a repair? What have you done to your vehicle that the mechanic did not advise you to do, or that you wanted to fix something that the mechanic did by yourself? So first, we'll give the mic to our guest today. David, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, I'm David Blaze. I've always been a fan of cars and old cars, newer cars, learning about cars. I'm not the most knowledgeable about them by any means necessary, but I've always had a general interest in cars and the car culture as a whole, as Mr. Jake Douglas knows as well, as I did go to the Newport Car Museum with him a couple of weeks ago, where I saw my dream car, a Plymouth Roadrunner. But for today's topic, though, the one thing that stands out to me about this topic is my old car before I have my current car, which right now I drive a 2007 Hyundai Accent, and it's not electric at all. So even the windows are hand cranked and manual, and it's a pain in the ass. But my old car before that was a 2002 Honda Accord. And one day, the car felt really weird. The heat gauge, the temperature gauge in my car kept rising and rising, and there's clearly some type of problem. Now, usually when the heat gauge or temperature gauge, however you want to call it or refer to it as, when it rises, it's usually a clear sort of a sign there's something with the engine. And so when I saw that was happening, I had to get it checked out immediately. I brought it to the Broad Street Garage over in Woonsocket, where my mom and I have been going for years for any of our car and mechanical needs, and never had a problem. But they told me that it was a engine pistol replacement, which doesn't cost a lot at all, between $150 and $180. What it actually was a valve in the engine that needed to be replaced. And if anyone listening doesn't know what that means, that basically means you need to take apart the whole engine to replace the valve within an engine, and the bare minimum cost for that is $1,800. So driving a car with a Kelly Blue Book value of $2,000 and for a $1,800 repair definitely wasn't worth it. So the car sat at his shop for weeks without saying that it was fixed. The original problem with it was fine with the pistons, and it was weeks until he actually notified us it was the engine that was actually the problem. And he tried saying, hey, okay, so basically we lied to you this whole time. And it was just sitting here for weeks, when if it was resolved sooner and I was notified sooner, I could make plans about traveling and destinations, because I was given a false diagnostics of what was wrong with the car. That is when my uncle stepped in and towed off the guy who owned the shop, and I have not returned since. I now have a mechanic down in Warwick who's verified by the state and does all the state vehicle inspections actually for them. But being misdiagnosed, a piston replacement compared to a valve replacement is definitely when the mechanic tried to screw me over, and something I was very upset about.
Wow, that's crazy. When you have a used car like that, everyone knows Hondas are excellent vehicles. But if you do not maintain your vehicle correctly, you can have the best vehicle in the world, but if you don't change your oil, don't keep up with maintenance, the car can get screwed. So having a 2002 Honda Accord, I figured it would be a great vehicle, but apparently someone down the line did not take care of it, and you ended up having a problem. Yes. So I'm glad that you've moved on from that mechanic. There's a lot of bad mechanics out there that are trying to upsell you the kitchen sink. They want to give you the whole 9 yards, give you everything you could possibly need. Oh, you got an oil leak. We got to fix the oil leak. Well, if it's not dripping in your driveway, it's not much of a leak. And the mechanics there, some of them are sleazy, but you want to find a trusted mechanic like you have yours in Warwick, who's registered by the state, who can fix your problems, wrap it up, and not make waves. Those are the kind of good people we need.
Without a doubt. And, it's definitely a problem throughout the country where, unfortunately, mechanics, they don't expect everyone to be knowledgeable about cars or know a thing or two about them. And especially single women, or especially single mothers, and especially with me having a single mother, she has been screwed a copious amount of times by mechanics, taking advantage of her not knowing about cars. One day, they even cleaned out the air filter, and they found acorns in there. So there's clearly some problems with the car, and there were some maintenance problems with it, but they ignored this fact and tried upselling my mom on things that didn't need to be done and ended up causing debt, which was unnecessary. And it's unfortunate. And I honestly believe if you are going to look at a car and you really don't know what you're doing, always bring someone who knows a thing or two about cars, who knows how to maintain one, is what my opinion is.
You hit the nail on the head there, David. Excellent point. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Not a lot of people know about cars. They know nothing, and it's quite sad when people get taken advantage of by that. Cars. When I was younger, I used to think cars were cars, and they ran and ran, and that was it. But there's a lot of responsibility with a vehicle. You need to make sure that you're on top of all the maintenance in order for it to run at peak performance and it to last as long as possible. And when mechanics try and sell you new things, it's just it's a big waste, and it's very upsetting and depressing. Jake, tell us a story.
Well, if anyone remembers from the first podcast that we did when we were talking about our cars and, how they run and branding and stuff like that. Again, Cadillacs are now, instead of known as the luxury and the car to get, they're now the cars that old timers like to reminisce and have to constantly bring it back to the dealership to have something fixed. And my car is part of that system, unfortunately. It was one of the last cars to, still be built in Detroit and still have that American car and feel to it, and again, that luxury. But again, there's still some defects in the lineup because it was the second or third gen of this model. And just about this time last year, actually, I was driving my car around and it was fine. And then one day I get up, get into the car, turn the ignition, and it doesn't start. And I was like, well, that's weird. Why wouldn't my car start? And again, even though I'm not a mechanic myself and I don't know a lot about cars, you try to run a quick diagnostic in your head, well, what makes a car start? A starter makes the car start. Maybe it's a starter. But the weird thing was, or maybe a dead battery or needed to jump, you know what I mean? The weird thing was I could turn the ignition, I could hear it trying to rev the engine and maybe the gas firing into the valve, the engine system. And I could even, get power into the car to see, the lights, the radio, all that other stuff. A nifty function that my car does have that a lot of cars don't have is that it has its own code system that reads on your dashboard screen. So it will give you a code and tell you what's wrong with your vehicle without even having to plug in an external reader, which is it comes in handy, because a decent reader that can read not only just GMC cars or Honda cars, because they all have different coding systems. It could also read Mercedes or whatever. Those things probably range between $250 and $600, and that's not what a novice car person who's just trying to maintain their vehicle really wants to drop money on. Needless to say, I found out there's something wrong with my idle control system, and that has a lot of components to it as well. It could be the temperature gauge, it could be the air idle control valve, it could be the air idle control computer. It's so many different things. Thankfully, again, I had a code that spat something out to me, DH1C300, something random like that. I did not have a trusted mechanic at the time, so I had to get it towed by AAA all the way down to Warwick, where the Cadillac dealership is. And if there's anything people should know about dealerships, is that you should never get your car fixed at a dealership.
That is correct. Never go to the dealership ever, unless you have a recall, and recalls are free. They're recalling your vehicle for something they screwed up on.
Yes. To most people, they think they make their money off of car sales, but it's actually repair and maintenance is where they make their money. So again, before you even want to take it to a mechanic or a dealership to get it fixed, I'm not going to judge if you want to get it, if you trust, the mechanics at your dealership or whatever, or you have a warranty and it can only be fixed there for certain things, that's fine. But before you even take it anywhere to get fixed, look to see if you can try to fix it yourself, because now that the internet is a thing, you'd no longer have to be like, well, I'm going to stare at this thing and pretend that I know everything about it, or I don't want to stare at this thing because it, people lift the hood and they're like, that's the engine. But it's like, no, that's not just the engine. The engine is just one component of everything underneath your hood. So I brought it to the Cadillac dealership, and they were like, oh, yeah, it's something wrong with the air idle control. I'm like, well, I kind of knew that because they gave me the code and I looked that up online. I just didn't know, where that is in relation to the vehicle and underneath the hood. And I don't know if I could fix it myself. I knew that the part itself costed off market, not, branded. Off market was like $130. So, that already is like a steep investment. But then they're like, well, for us, we have to use GM parts, which is another downside of working at of getting your car worked on at a dealership, is they can only use the market parts. So that's another reason why you probably don't want to really go there, because they will charge you for the highest price. And that's just because they have to follow that rules. But anyway, they're like, oh, the part's going to cost like $250 and the labor is going to cost $800. I'm like, what? $800 for labor? That's ridiculous. And I was like, I can't, I can't afford that. I'm a college student. I need a car to get me from point A to point B. What am I going to do? I was freaking out. I was like, do I have to scrap my car and then, dump that money into something else or whatever and see if I can get along for a little bit? But no, instead, I had a friend who was rather technical or whatever, and he looked up a video on YouTube on how to put in the thing, and you disconnect the battery, you use like a simple wrench and socket tool, and I had it towed to that person's house, and boom, we got it fixed, and it took like not even 4 hours of actual work too. So again, if you can try to figure out what's wrong with your vehicle by yourself and see if you can do it yourself in your home or your garage or even college parking lot, because sometimes they have rules about that, but there's also a gray area where it's like, they're not going to really like say, hey, you can't do that, as long as it's not an oil change, you know what I mean? But yeah, so saved myself a lot of money on that one and did not go to the dealership ever again to get my car fixed.
And that's a wise decision after all. The dealerships they have so much overhead and bills to pay that they have to make money somehow. And like you said, and it's absolutely true, a lot of the income is not from sales, it's from the shop. And they just try to sell you everything. And it's a little upsetting. Now, here's a story that I have. My first car was a 2009 Chrysler PT Cruiser. It was blue and it was funky. While I was driving it, there was some sort of steam coming from the engine one night, and I had no idea what was going on. It's some steam or whatever. I didn't know what to do. So my girlfriend works at a dealership, Tasker Buick GMC in Woonsocket, and because she was my girlfriend, there was a company discount or whatever. So I figured, okay, well, I took it to a mechanic, and what the mechanic did, I took it to a mom and pop mechanic shop. What the mechanic did is they cleaned up. There was some oil spilled, some oil stuff on my engine, whatever. I must have been leaking oil on the engine. So the mechanic cleaned it up and they charged me X amount of dollars. I don't remember. Little mom and pop shop. They did okay. And when I drove off and the mechanic a day later started smoldering or smoking again, I didn't know what it was. So I went to a dealership. I thought at the time, okay, this is a dealership, a commercial dealership. They got to have the equipment. They must know what they're doing because they're so big and they cost more money. They must be good. So I had my car checked out. I explained to them that my engine it doesn't smoke. It's like a steam. Like it's not black or gray. It's just this kind of like smoldering smoke emitting from under the hood. Not a lot, but enough to raise some flags that shouldn't be doing that at all. I took it to the mechanic and to the Tasker Buick GMC dealership, and they checked it out over the course of however long it took. And they wrote me up an invoice for $2,780 of work that needed to be done on the car. Now, I know that cars cost, a car like a Chrysler PT Cruiser, one of the worst cars ever made, has a lot of problems, granted. But this invoice was telling me all the things that my car needed. And this is sort of like a first car. I don't want to make it up to it. I don't want to bring it up to its best performance, because even that is terrible, because this was a terrible car overall. So they wanted to charge me $2,800 to do everything that they needed, hours and labors. I looked at the price on the bottom of the invoice, and I basically figuratively crumbled it up and threw it away. I didn't look at what they were charging me for, but it was ridiculous. My parents thought the same thing. It was horrible. I ended up taking it to a different shop altogether, a small mom and pop shop. And it turns out that my head gasket was leaking. So I ended up getting a head gasket fixed. Now, what a head gasket is your engine has a cover, sort of a plastic or metal cover. You take it off the engine, and then there's a gasket, like a rubber gasket, like in your like a rubber gasket, like for a pool filter, or for, it's a piece of rubber that fits perfectly over your engine where the pistons are, and blah 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 blah. So it cost me. So it ended up, the mom and pop shop ended up charging me 300 and something bucks to get it fixed. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that's better than the 2,800 bucks that the mechanic wanted to do. So he put a new gasket on, sealed it. The problem was fixed. Today, I could have, knowing what I know now, this is before I knew what I knew now about cars mechanics. Today, I could have fixed it myself for about $30, because it's a piece of rubber. You get the right part and you can install it yourself. It's not hard to do it, as long as you have the tools, the ratchet set to get the engine cover off, and you can take the thing off, the old gasket, and put a nice fresh one on, glue it in properly, seal it, and it's incredibly not complex. I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's definitely not complex. And you can do it yourself and save so much money, which is why I tell people, try and educate yourself a little bit on your car, and you can save all this money instead of taking it to the dealer and having them sell you a bunch of stuff. So that's one of my stories.
That's always how it goes, right? You know, like you're like, oh man, I knew that it was gonna be at least that simple of an issue, and maybe I could have fixed it. But you always have to look back in hindsight, and well, at least you learned it. You know what I mean? And then for future cars or future maintenance on the one that you own, at least you know that. You know?
Yeah, and sort of what like you talked about, Savvy, on what a lot of people don't realize is what the mechanics and even dealerships make a majority of their money on is labor. And they overcharge for that it's ridiculous. You get it's absolutely awful. You get screwed out of so much money, but there are great websites like rockautoparts.com who have great parts really cheap and really help you get discounted parts. And if you learn how to do it yourself, you really should learn how to do it yourself. You just learn for the future and inform other people, but also for yourself, for your own benefit.
Yeah, there's also another website called Car Killer app. Now, this is the holy grail of information. It's hosted by a mechanic, a well-known mechanic on YouTube called Scotty Kelmer. He's been a mechanic for 53 years and knows just about everything about cars. And he's extremely honest. He's pure, and he's a great guy. He's seen it all. He's a Bible. He knows everything. So he created an app, and he's got a whole bunch of trusted moderators where you can ask your personal, unique question about a car, your issue, and they will get back to you in a couple of days, answering it, telling you if you need to go to the dealer, if you can do it yourself. They can even give you a list of products you need. I asked them, for example, my 2016 Honda Civic, the car I currently drive, the AC doesn't blow. The AC blows cool on the passenger side air vents, but on the driver's side, it blows lukewarm in room temperature. So I asked them what the issue was, and they described that, well, the coolant is only about halfway through with the vent in the front of your car where the fans blow, and you just need to add some refrigerant. Now, I'm a fanatic with my car. I want everything to be perfect and done correctly. If you had an older car, you could just add the coolant in, and there's videos you can look up on how to do that. But to do it properly, you need to remove the coolant from the car using what's called a reverse scale, and adding the proper coolant under the correct pressure is something a bit complex for someone to do at home, and it requires specific tools. In this case, they would recommend you going to, say, a mom and pop mechanic shop. Don't ever ever go to the dealer. Never go to the dealer unless you're buying a very specific part. But usually when you buy a specific part like that, you're installing it yourself. For example, I bought splash guards for my Honda Civic from the dealer because I knew it was going to fit perfectly. Yeah, it cost a lot of money, but I'm a fanatic. I wanted it to fit perfect. So I didn't go on Amazon. I wanted it to fit perfect. So I got it from the dealer. There's a few other little things you definitely want from the dealer too, that are very specific for your vehicle. But other than that, AutoZone, O'Reilly Auto Parts, Advanced Auto Parts, Jiffy Lube, Speedy, all these mechanic shops and repair businesses, they all sell parts you can get that fit your car perfectly. You can even try and ask them for OEM parts. OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufactured. That will definitely fit your car and was built for your car. I recommend that for oil filters when you do your oil change. I recommend having the OEM oil filter, but Mobile One is great too. If you're a real fanatic, stick to the Original Equipment Manufactured and the correct engine oil. You don't want to put a heavier weight oil or lighter weight oil in your engine compartment because that can ruin your engine and all that bad stuff. You definitely want to learn about your vehicle so you can fix it yourself and save yourself a ton of money. You want to have your car the best it can be, perform the best, and just be as healthy as it can be. But just because your car is at its peak performance level doesn't mean you should drive like a maniac. Next week, we're going to talk about road rage, if you've ever been in it and if you've ever seen it. So stay tuned for next week's episode. This concludes our CARCAST podcast for the week. We'll see you guys next time.